Hello. This is my introduction to the world of internet reviewing, so please feel free to slaughter me in the comments section. For my debut, I'm going to be reviewing A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Look at that weird art. Ooh. I read this book as a build-up to Ulysses, which, other than James Joyce's other book, Finnegan's Wake, is probably the most well-known standard of difficult fiction. I mean, probably better than Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake's more well-known as difficult among literary nerds like myself, but pretty much everyone, even if they've got no knowledge of literature, knows Ulysses is the most difficult book among well-known books. It's part of the modernist movement, so it shares shelves and genre with Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, maybe Nabokov for those more postmodernists. And so therefore it's got lots of stream of consciousness, but I think even more than those authors, even more than even Faulkner, that's got a reputation for difficulty. So going into Ulysses, I need some preparation material. His first two novels, his first novel and collection of short stories, Dubliners, which I also read. And both of these books, I think, are quite conventional in comparison to what I assume as later works. I haven't actually read them yet, but they have their reputation. There's moments early on in Portrait of an Artist which have a kind of modernist stream of consciousness atmosphere, like the young Stephen thinks of one thing, it leads to another thing, like a train of thought, which is quite unusual for novels, but overall it's quite unusually descriptive as well, but which is unusual even for modernism as well as literature, because modernism is quite bare bones, but on the whole I think it's quite a conventional novel, especially by Joyce's standards. I think religion and art are the main theme of the book, and the conflict between them, as well as the way they also complement each other in a strange way, because obviously a vast history of art is religion influence. You've got Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all those Christian painters, as well as Christian authors like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. But I think mainly this book talks about how art and religion contrast and conflict with each other. I mean, we've got on the one hand art, which is represented early on in Stephen Daedalus' life by his lust after a particular woman who is never named, but is kind of his childhood sweetheart, who he sees again in university. And he's conflicted between his religious upbringing and his lust after her, and I think he finds an outlet for this kind of thing in visits to brothels, prostitution, that kind of thing, which is probably worse, but he obviously doesn't see it that way. And then halfway through the novel we get this section which is actually quite terrifying, a massive fiery sermon, classic Irish Catholicism. You must not sin because one sin can send you to hell. Even me, as a bona fide atheist, I found it a bit terrifying and made me worry maybe I've made a mistake and I was actually going to go to hell, which is always a worry, but the book made me worry even more about that. But I might go to hell with another religion, you never know. And this kind of makes Stephen Daedalus change his mind about all the prostitution. I mean, he already feels guilty, but this kind of sends him over the edge. He goes and confesses in a strange church across the city of Dublin, so no one knows who he is, and then he lives out his life in a kind of cruel, uncompromising, classic Christian way. Like, if you've ever heard of Opus Dei, it's like that kind of thing. He wears really uncomfortable clothes and he punishes himself for stuff, and he doesn't eat very nice food. And I mean, not the worst thing in the world, better than hell, obviously, but are probably unnecessary, and even in the eyes of most Christians, especially, and in my eyes and Joyce's eyes. Joyce was an agnostic, so obviously the book isn't championing this kind of behaviour. And you see that later on, because he has another epiphany. When he gets asked to join the order, he realises he doesn't really want a life of religion, a life of priesthood. He doesn't believe strongly enough. He wants to be an artist. And art, I think, is not just in its raw materials, like early on in the book, lust and emotion, but he wants to create art from these emotions, refine it into something worthwhile. I suppose that's what art is, the refinement of emotion into worthwhile things. These first few chapters of the book, the first 4 chapters, are probably the best bits about the book. I mean, it's most of the book. The good prose, Joyce loves his prose. It's, as I've said, eloquently descriptive, and it really captures Stephen's emotions quite strongly, especially in the second chapter, which is the culmination of his kind of development as a youth. His emotions boiling up in there. Once it gets to the sermon and the after effects of that on his life, the prose gets a bit more bare bones to reflect the harsh lifestyle. But even then, I think Joyce well describes his transformation. It's the last section of the book, though, the 5th chapter, the longest by far, presents the book's challenges and problems. As much as Joyce is championed by his adulators as being someone who represents life in its fullest, the smell of knickers, rather than philosophy, I've heard someone describe as Finnegan's Wake. But I don't think Joyce is very good really at dialogue, kind of everyday stuff. Most of the book is dramatic, emotional moments, and he's great at those, really well described. But once we kind of get into Stephen Daedalus' university days, it's just really rusty and horrible, most of the dialogue. He tries to write kind of witty banter, playful innuendo, and obviously gets a bit of communism in there, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but obviously communism was around a lot those days, so probably some communist intellectuals at the university. Never something you can do without at a university. But all in all, I think Joyce is just really bad at writing witty banter. He should leave it to Jane Austen, because she's the queen of witty banter. But yeah, good book. Good first novel by Joyce that I've read, and the first that he's written as well, novel-wise. I look forward to reading Ulysses, and I look forward to doing some more reviews and getting probably, hopefully, better at doing it, because this is a shambles, as you could probably already work out. I'm doing a very stream of consciousness style, which you could say suits the book, but that is a poor excuse at best. I think a C is the right grade for the novel. It is a good novel in places, but it's quite inconsistent, and the last chapter really lets it down. Just the poor dialogue. I really tried to think of a new word than poor, but my brain is not working very well today. Thank you for sitting through my incredibly tedious monotone and managing not to blow your brains out. I will see you next time.